During World War II, the United States military approved one of the most bizarre weapons programs in history. The plan? Train pigeons to guide missiles into enemy targets. This wasn't science fiction. This wasn't a joke. This was Project Pigeon, funded by the National Defense Research Committee and backed by the U.S. Navy. The mastermind behind it? B.F. Skinner, one of the most respected psychologists of the 20th century. For nearly a decade, America's top scientists seriously believed that birds could win the war. This is the forgotten story of how pigeons almost became America's ultimate weapon. To understand why the military would even consider this, we need to go back to 1940. Europe was burning. Nazi Germany had conquered Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The Luftwaffe was pounding British cities night after night in the Blitz. Japan was expanding across Asia, and the United States, still neutral but preparing for the inevitable, faced a terrifying reality. American weapons weren't accurate enough. In 1940, if you wanted to destroy a factory, a bridge, or an enemy battleship, you had one option: drop bombs from aircraft and pray they hit the target. Most of the time, they didn't. Bombing accuracy was abysmal. Studies showed that fewer than 20% of bombs dropped from high altitude landed within a quarter mile of their intended target. That's not hitting a building. That's not even hitting the right neighborhood. The problem was physics. A bomb falls in a parabolic arc. Wind pushes it off course. The aircraft's speed affects trajectory. Altitude changes everything. Anti-aircraft fire forces pilots to bomb from higher altitudes, making accuracy even worse. The Norden bomb sight, America's top-secret targeting device, was supposed to solve this. It didn't. It helped, but not enough. What the military desperately needed was a guided bomb, a weapon that could adjust its course mid-flight and actually hit what you aimed at. But in 1940, that technology didn't exist. Radar guidance was theoretical. Radio-controlled weapons were primitive and easily jammed. Infrared sensors were years away from being functional. The problem seemed unsolvable. That's when Burris Frederick Skinner entered the picture. Skinner was not a military man. He was a Harvard psychologist who studied animal behavior. By 1940, he had already revolutionized psychology with his work on operant conditioning, the idea that you could shape behavior through rewards and punishments. Skinner had spent years training rats and pigeons to perform increasingly complex tasks. He could teach a pigeon to peck a specific sequence of buttons. He could train rats to navigate mazes. He could condition animals to respond to visual cues within fractions of a second. And then, one day in 1940, Skinner had an idea. He was watching pigeons in a park when it hit him. What if you could train a pigeon to recognize an enemy target? What if you put that pigeon inside a bomb? What if the pigeon's pecking controlled the bomb's fins, steering it toward the target? It sounded insane. Skinner knew that. But he also knew his pigeons. They had extraordinary vision, better than human eyesight. They could process visual information faster than any human pilot. They could distinguish between shapes, colors, and objects with stunning accuracy. And they could be trained to focus on a task even under stress. Skinner refined the concept. Place a pigeon in the nose cone of a glide bomb. Install a small screen in front of the bird showing a live video feed of the view ahead. Train the pigeon to recognize specific targets: enemy ships, buildings, bridges. As the bomb falls, the pigeon pecks at the target image on the screen. Sensors detect where the pigeon is pecking. Those pecks control hydraulic systems that adjust the bomb's fins. The bomb steers itself toward the target. Simple, elegant, completely absurd. In late 1940, Skinner approached the National Defense Research Committee, a government organization tasked with developing new weapons. He pitched Project Pigeon. Most officials thought he was joking. Some laughed. But the committee was desperate. Conventional guidance systems weren't working. Electronic systems were years away. Maybe, just maybe, Skinner was onto something. In 1941, the committee gave him a small grant to prove the concept. Skinner got to work. Skinner's laboratory became a pigeon boot camp. He started with basic training. Show the pigeon a simple shape, a circle, a square. Reward the bird when it pecks the correct shape. Repeat thousands of times. Within days, pigeons learned to identify shapes with near-perfect accuracy. Next level, photographs. Skinner showed pigeons images of warships. At first, just one ship. The bird learned to peck whenever it saw that ship. Then Skinner introduced variations. The same ship from different angles. The same ship at different distances. The same ship in different lighting conditions. The pigeons adapted. They recognized the ship no matter how it appeared. Then came the hardest test, distinguishing between friendly and enemy vessels. Skinner showed pigeons photographs of American destroyers, Japanese battleships, German U-boats. The birds learned to peck only at enemy ships. Their accuracy was stunning, over 90% correct identification, better than many human spotters. But recognizing a photograph in a laboratory is different from tracking a real target while plummeting toward Earth at 300 miles per hour. Skinner needed to simulate combat conditions. He built a centrifuge, a spinning machine that could subject pigeons to extreme G-forces. He strapped pigeons into harnesses, spun them at high speeds, and showed them target images. The birds kept pecking. Even under conditions that would disorient a human, the pigeons stayed locked on their targets. Then there was the noise problem. A bomb doesn't fall silently. There's wind howl, mechanical vibration, the roar of air rushing past. Skinner played recordings of these sounds at deafening volumes while pigeons trained. The birds ignored the noise. They had one job: peck the target. Nothing distracted them. By 1943, Skinner had a working prototype. He called it the Pelican system. It used 3 pigeons for redundancy. Each bird sat in its own compartment, each with its own screen. Each pigeon's pecks controlled a portion of the guidance system. If one bird made a mistake, the other 2 would outvote it. Democracy at terminal velocity. The system worked. In laboratory tests, the Pelican system achieved accuracy rates that stunned observers. Skinner was ready for a live demonstration. In 1944, with the war raging in both Europe and the Pacific, Skinner arranged a demonstration for high-ranking military officials. He brought his trained pigeons, his Pelican guidance system, and 3 years of data proving it worked. The demonstration took place at a secure facility. Skinner set up a simulation. A screen displayed moving footage of enemy ships. The pigeons were placed in the guidance system. The officials watched. The results were immediate. The pigeons locked on to the target ship instantly. As the target moved across the screen, the pigeons tracked it perfectly. Their pecking controlled simulated guidance fins. In a real scenario, the bomb would have scored a direct hit. Skinner showed the officials his data. Over 10,000 successful test runs, 90% accuracy, faster reaction times than any human pilot. The system worked in daylight, in clouds, in poor visibility. It couldn't be jammed like radio signals. It didn't require complex electronics that could fail. Skinner was confident. This was the moment Project Pigeon would be approved for mass production. Thousands of pigeon-guided bombs would be manufactured. America would have the war's most accurate weapon. But the military officials were skeptical. They raised objections. First, reliability. What if the pigeon died mid-flight? What if it got distracted by something other than the target? What if enemy anti-aircraft fire damaged the compartment? Skinner explained the redundancy system. 3 pigeons meant 2 could fail and the system would still work. Not good enough, the officials said. Second, weather. What if it was raining? What if visibility was poor? Skinner showed data proving pigeons could see in conditions humans couldn't. The officials weren't convinced. Third, public perception. This was perhaps the real issue. Imagine the headlines: "America wins war using birds." How would that look compared to Nazi Germany's V-2 rockets and advanced jet fighters? The optics were terrible. The American public expected high technology, not trained animals. And what if the enemy captured a pigeon-guided bomb? The propaganda value for the Axis powers would be immense. The mighty United States reduced to using pigeons. And finally, timing. By 1944, electronic guidance systems were making real progress. Radar-guided missiles were in development. Radio-controlled glide bombs were being tested. These systems didn't need to be fed. They didn't require veterinary care. They didn't have biological limitations. The military thanked Skinner for his work and told him they would keep the project under consideration. That was bureaucratic language for no. Project Pigeon was shelved. Skinner was devastated. He had spent 3 years proving his system worked, and it had been rejected not because it failed, but because it was too strange. Most rejected weapons projects die quietly. Project Pigeon didn't. In 1948, the Cold War was heating up. The Soviet Union had blockaded Berlin. Communist forces were winning in China. The United States faced a new enemy with massive conventional forces. The Navy, desperate for any edge, revisited Skinner's work. Maybe the idea wasn't so crazy after all. The project was revived under a new name, Project Orcon, short for Organic Control. The concept was identical, but the technology had improved. Better cameras provided clearer images. Improved harnesses kept pigeons more comfortable during flight. More sensitive pecking sensors allowed for finer control. Skinner was brought back. He resumed training immediately. This time, the pigeons were trained to recognize Soviet ships. Photographs of Red Navy destroyers, cruisers, submarines. The birds learned quickly. Tests showed they could distinguish between American and Soviet vessels with over 95% accuracy, even better than the World War II training. The Navy was impressed. They authorized field tests. In 1949, a prototype Orcon system was installed in a test glide bomb. The bomb was loaded onto a Navy aircraft and carried over a test range. Target, a decommissioned ship painted to resemble a Soviet destroyer. The bomb was released, the pigeons activated. For the first time, Project Pigeon technology was airborne. The test was successful. The bomb, guided by 3 pigeons pecking frantically at their screens, steered directly toward the target ship. It struck within feet of dead center. Skinner had proven, conclusively, that the system worked in real-world conditions. The Navy ordered more tests. Over the next 4 years, dozens of flights were conducted. The ORCON system consistently outperformed early electronic guidance systems. It worked in fog. It worked in rain. It worked when radio jamming would have disabled conventional guidance. The Pigeons never failed. They always found the target. But the world was changing faster than the Pigeons could adapt. By 1953, radar-guided missiles had become reliable. Infrared sensors could track heat signatures from ships and aircraft. Radio-controlled weapons had solved their jamming problems. These systems had advantages that Pigeons couldn't match. They worked in complete darkness. They didn't need training. They didn't require life support systems. They were getting cheaper to produce. Most importantly, they didn't require explaining to Congress why the Navy's budget included bird food. In October 1953, the Chief of Naval Operations issued a final memo. Project ORCON was to be permanently terminated. No further funding would be allocated. The Pigeons were retired to animal facilities. The guidance systems were dismantled. The research data was filed away in archives, classified for decades. Skinner moved on to other projects. The U.S. military never used a pigeon-guided weapon in combat. The Cold War would be fought with electronics, not animals. So why should anyone care about a failed weapons program from 80 years ago? Because Project Pigeon represents something important about how we solve problems during wartime, and because its legacy is more significant than most people realize. First, this wasn't a fringe experiment conducted by mad scientists. This was funded by the National Defense Research Committee, the same organization that developed radar, the proximity fuse, and contributed to the Manhattan Project. B.F. Skinner wasn't a crackpot. He was one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. His work on operant conditioning changed how we understand behavior, learning, and training. The military took this seriously because serious people proposed it. Second, Project Pigeon demonstrated the limits of biological systems in warfare. Skinner proved that pigeons could be trained to perform complex military tasks with extraordinary precision. He proved that pigeons could guide weapons more accurately than humans. But he also proved that no matter how well a biological system performs, it carries limitations that machines don't have. Animals need food, rest, and care. They can be injured or killed. They have finite lifespans. As soon as electronic systems became reliable, biological systems became obsolete. Third, the project influenced how we think about autonomous weapons. The core concept of Project Pigeon, a weapon that guides itself to a target based on visual recognition, is exactly what modern smart weapons do. Today's missiles use cameras and artificial intelligence to identify and track targets. Drones process visual data in real time to distinguish between vehicles, buildings, and people. The technology is different, but the principle is identical to what Skinner proposed in 1940. Project Pigeon was the philosophical ancestor of every guided weapon in use today. Fourth, it reminds us how desperate World War II made the Allied powers. When you're fighting Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, you consider every option. Some options were brilliant: radar, the atomic bomb, code breaking. Some were failures: earthquake bombs, bat bombs, pigeon bombs. But every option was explored. The willingness to think unconventionally, to test bizarre ideas, to fund long-shot projects. That's part of why the Allies won. And finally, Project Pigeon is a story about the collision between innovation and perception. Skinner's system worked. The data proved it. But it didn't matter. In warfare, perception matters as much as capability. A weapon has to be credible, not just functional. Pigeon-guided bombs were functional. They just weren't credible. Sometimes the best idea loses, not because it's wrong, but because it's too strange for people to accept. In 1960, Skinner published a paper about Project Pigeon in American Psychologist magazine. It was the first time the project was declassified and made public. Skinner wrote, "The pigeon is an extraordinarily reliable and efficient little organism. It can maintain sustained attention under difficult circumstances. It has excellent vision and can learn complex discriminations. It is not bothered by noise, vibration, or acceleration." He was defending his work. He knew people would laugh. They did. But Skinner also knew he had been right. The system worked. In laboratory tests, in field tests, in every condition the military could simulate, the pigeons performed flawlessly. They never missed. The humans who evaluated them did. Skinner never apologized for Project Pigeon. He considered it one of his most important contributions to applied psychology. He proved that behavior could be shaped so precisely that even something as chaotic as warfare could be controlled by a trained animal. Today, Project Pigeon is remembered as a curiosity, a strange footnote in World War II history, a punchline to a joke about government waste. But it wasn't. It was a legitimate attempt by brilliant scientists to solve an impossible problem using unconventional thinking. It was a moment when the boundaries between biology and technology blurred, and it was a reminder that innovation doesn't always look the way we expect. The pigeons never failed. They trained, they performed, they waited for deployment that never came. And then they were retired, their contribution to history forgotten for decades, until researchers opened the archives and found the files. Project Pigeon, Project Orcon, the weapons program that worked perfectly and was never used. This is the story that was buried in classified documents for half a century. The story of how America tried to weaponize pigeons. The story of the birds that almost guided bombs into enemy ships. The story of the strangest weapon of World War II. Hidden in the archives, until now. If you found this story fascinating, there are dozens more hidden in the archives. Subscribe to see what we uncover next.